Welcome to the Steady On podcast, where God's hard truth meets your hard story. I don't need to tell you that life gets hard. Life gets hard, really hard. But God's faithfulness is still active and alive in our hard. And these episodes are dedicated to remembering and claiming the promises of a faithful God. I'm your host, Angie Bauman. I'm a pastor and Bible teacher, founder of Steady On Ministries, and creator of the Step-by-Step Bible Study Method. But more than that, I'm a trauma and abuse survivor who carried a heavy weight of shame and worthlessness for many years. And I still struggle, but I live in much more freedom now because I know God through His Word and speak truth to the lies of the enemy with His Word. And that's what we do here. On Mondays, we take it in by studying the promises of God. And on Wednesdays, we live it out with teaching and testimony on the promises of God. So thank you for tuning in, my friend. You are the reason for this show. And I'm so very, very glad you are here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome into episode 152 with my guest today, podcaster, writer, entrepreneur, award-winning filmmaker, speaker, Jay Fantom. And he's Australian, so he's super fun to listen to as well. In his 26 years, Jay has dealt more with his own mortality than most of us do until the end of our lives. He says he was born fighting, and when the fight became too much for him, he attempted to end his life in the summer of 2019. But God. Jay feels like God intervened, spared his life, and called Jay out of the misery and darkness in which he was living into a life where Jay could wait on God, hope in God, trust in God, and in that place of dependence move from weakness to strength. Which is why his life verse and our verse for this episode is Isaiah 40:31. We're going to focus in on the first part, which says in the Amplified Bible, "But those who wait for the Lord, who expect, look for, and hope in Him, will gain new strength and renew their power." Jay is gaining strength and renewing his power. And I think, my friend, as you listen to him share, you will feel God reminding you that you can do the same. Let's listen in. Hello, Steady On community, and welcome to this podcast episode, the Steady On podcast, a place where we take it in and live it out. And I'm Angie Bauman, and with me today for this Live It Out episode is Jay Fantom. Jay, welcome to the Steady On community.
Angie, great to be here. I'm ready to live it out with you and your community.
I love that. So we are going to talk to Jay a little bit about some of the things that he's been through and how he is living out the promises of God now in his life. And because it is a process for all of us, is it not, Jay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really is.
Unless I was like, there was this pause and I'm like, oh, wait, you have the answer and you do it perfectly every day. And so I've met my match.
I wish. I wish that was the case.
I know it's not the case for any of us, but I think it's encouraging when we share that with each other, because it helps. You know, there are days that I feel like, okay, I'm wholly trusting you. Like I'm leaning into you. I'm like trusting you with my story. I'm giving you my life. And then there are other days that I'm like, I just feel like a hot mess. And sometimes on those days when someone else can remind me of what I know, it helps so much. And so we just thank you for your time and your willingness to share with us for a few minutes. You talk a lot about some of the hardships that you've been through. And I'm wondering if you'll just kind of share with us a few pieces from your story, a little bit about your background. What are some of the experiences you've had that have left a real imprint on your life?
There's so many things that I've had to journey through in my life, a lot of different challenges, even from like the very beginning of my life. I was born with kidney reflux and scar tissue on the right side of my kidney. So I basically say in my book that I was born fighting, because there was a lot of things that I had to overcome, even as a little kid, that not a lot of kids have to overcome at that age. And then there were a lot of times when I was in and out of hospital with some unexplained illnesses. There was a trauma, a sexual abuse trauma that I went through at the age of 6 as well. Pretty much growing up, my home away from home, sort of here I was growing up in Sydney, Australia, was basically the hospital. So in and out. And I actually saw a lot of kids my age and some older that were going through some pretty harsh times as well. And it made me want to help them as much as I possibly could, whether it was bringing a smile to their face. And even though I was struggling in my own right, I wanted to make them feel like life was a little bit easier. And so just making them laugh, or cracking a joke here and there, or just telling a story, that sort of thing. So the age of two and a bit, I had salmonella food poisoning that I almost died from. So there was complications. My kidneys were dehydrated, and then I almost died again at the age of 14 and 15 when I had a burst appendix, which was another interesting story entirely. And then going through depression, anxiety, uh, and then a suicide attempt in 2019. So those are just some of the things that I've been through.
I'd like to stay right there for what do you feel is important for us to know about the suicide attempt? I was going to say, what do you feel comfortable sharing? But I'm not going to say it that way because often God asks us to share a little beyond what we feel comfortable. So, what is it that you share about that might help the listener sort of identify with the place that you've been?
Well, that whole attempt and the events surrounding to me being in that car and attempting to hit the pole, uh, I was in a very, very dark place.
Yeah.
My life wasn't going anywhere that I wanted it to. I was so far away from God, it wasn't even funny. I was very resentful. I was miserable. I didn't know my own worth. I was being abused in my job of real estate. I just was struggling in life. I was depressed, very anxious as well, and I just bottled down all my emotions, everything that I was feeling, everything that I was going through. No one knew about it. I kept it all inside, and I suffered in perfect silence for a very, very long time. And every single day, I struggled to get out of bed. I struggled to do the things that I should have been doing, like the job, like exercise. I just didn't enjoy life at all. And it all culminated to me saying, I want to be out of pain. I'm sick and tired of being stuck in this constant pit of despair, of being in continual agony, not knowing the kind of path that I'm supposed to be on. And so ultimately, I made the selfish decision one day in June of 2019 to pretty much attempt to end my life because I didn't want to be here anymore. And ultimately, the whole story surrounding that is I had the attempt, but God intervened, and in a miraculous way, too. And I share more in detail about the events, like the actual attempt, and what I did, and so forth. But the miraculous of God intervening was He stopped it from happening. And I remember being in the car after everything had transpired and just crying out to God and saying, "Look, Lord, I need you to give me worth. I need you to give me purpose. I need you to do something in my life that you would have me to do, and show me what you want for me to have done in my own life, to live for you, whatever it is." And it wasn't like this instantaneous, my life changed dramatically. It took months. But in that moment, I say I had a sense of peace. I just knew deep down inside that God had covered me with his loving embrace, and He said, "I've got you, Jay. It's going to be okay." And it was ultimately from that moment on.
What made you cry out to God, do you think? Because I wrote down that you said that you were in a very dark place and that you were far from God for a long time. And so, in that moment of desperation, I think a lot of times we cry out to God, even if we haven't been talking to Him or haven't been friendly terms with Him for a while. But I'm just wondering, do you have language around that? Like, what made that your response in that moment of desperation?
I just remember being in the car and crying, just in tears. And I'd grown up in a conservative Christian household my entire life. So I knew God was there, but I just chose for Him. I just didn't want to see Him. I blamed Him for everything that was going on. And in that moment, I think realizing that God actually had saved me there, and looking at, like, I'm still alive, it made me realize, hang on a minute, God is there and he just saved me. And what am I doing with my life? And that made me, I guess, in a sense of desperation as well, not really knowing what else to do, and crying out to him and saying, Lord, I just need you. If you're there, I know you're there, but where are you in all this? And I had just seen him right then, not a moment ago. I saw him turn up in a big way in my life, because I wouldn't be here otherwise. And that just made me realize even more that God's got something bigger in store and planned for my life. And what was I doing running so far away from him? That wasn't helping my situation at all. And look where it got me to, in the car, about to end my life. And I needed God more than ever in that moment. And it wasn't my own sense of peace that I got, it was God's grace and peace that he poured over me in that moment. And that's what I believe it really was. And I'll be forever grateful for that. And to this day, I continually remember of where I was to where I am now, and where I won't go ever again. Because a life lived without God is a miserable life. It really is.
Amen. I most of the time these things aren't sort of like linear, I guess is the word that I keep thinking of. So I'm wondering, you said that you grew up in a Christian home and you went through several things. I just wonder kind of what was there a major turning point that made you kind of turn your face against God? And then was the time in the car turning back towards God? Did some things what was that sort of, I'm going to call it a crisis of faith? How long did that last? What was that like for you, Jay?
So I guess it was so much, because I had been through a lot as a kid, and I'd wrestled with my faith growing up, I guess, at different points. And then there was the depression and the the anxiety and the struggle when I was 14 and 15. And once again, I was pretty far away from God during that moment. And I guess there were just points in my life where I just chose to blame God for bringing all this stuff on me, and saying, look, it's all your fault, God. You allowed this to happen in my life, and you're the reason why I'm going through so much pain, which is the wrong perspective to have. But I didn't care when I was going through all that. And everything was just, in 2018, I got meningitis. And there's also a point there that I talk about in the book as well, that there was a voice that I was wrestling with during that entire moment, when I I was told that in order for me to figure out whether or not I had meningitis, I needed to have a lumbar puncture, which means there's like a 50% chance, the doctor was saying, of it being a success or not. And I'm not a betting man, but I do not like those odds at all. And I balked at it. I'm like, no way am I going to do this? Like, what happens if something goes wrong? And the voice in my head that I was wrestling with, I believe it was God. He was trying to get me to see that he's got me even in that moment. It's going to be okay. Do you trust me, Jay? And I was like, naively, oh, of course, and proudly, of course I trust you. Why wouldn't I? But in reality, I didn't. I was just leaning on myself and this doctor, who, by the way, I couldn't actually see. So how can I trust someone that I can't actually see? Yet God was there, and I could see him, but I didn't trust him in that moment. How interesting is that?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm still here, and thank God for that. And so, me being in that car, once again, being so far away from God, and that moment, me having meningitis, it didn't bring me back to God at all. I went about my life, and then once again, 2019 comes around, struggle, 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 more and more, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? What is God doing? And so, once again, kept on blaming him. And then I just selfishly chose. So it was like a light bulb moment went off in my head, and it finally clicked. I had been running so far away from God, and he was trying to get me to understand that I needed him more and stop relying on my own strength, because my own strength wasn't working. I need to rely on his strength, which then later on I realized that my life verse is Isaiah 40:31. And he was trying to get me to see it all the way back then, but I kept on choosing not to see it. It was my choice, not God's. He was trying to help me, and I was just fighting against him.
Yeah. Yeah. My guess is that even though that you trust God now differently than you did before, that there are places or days or even a period of days or something, circumstances that encourage you to not trust him, right? Or tempt you to not trust him. So I'm wondering, how do you recognize that in yourself? Maybe like, oh, because we all do it, right? I'm relying on myself again. I'm falling back into some of these old habits, or I'm not. How do you recognize that in yourself, and what do you do when you do? I'm just wondering, practically speaking, because so many are relating to what you say. We've gone through struggles, and it's like natural to blame God, and yet we have to fight that humanness of relying on ourselves and blaming God, because he wants, as you were saying, he wants to be there for us in that struggle. So how do you recognize that, and what do you do when you sense that, oh, I'm doing the thing, you know?
I think in failure, we learn one of life's most precious and greatest lessons is that humility. And I think when we are going through a crisis of faith or a crisis in just life, ultimately what God's trying to do is strengthen our faith and get us to look towards him the most. One of my all-time favorite uh, stories or poems, as you will, is Footprints in the Sand. It's pretty popular amongst the Christian community and even the non-Christian community too, for some amazing reason. And I say it because whenever we can't see that God is actually working behind the scenes, it doesn't mean that he's not working. It's usually that he's got us in his palm of his hand, and he is actually carrying us through those difficult times. We just make the choice not to see it as that, because the pain is so insurmountable around us, and it can constrict us. So what I try and do in that moment is remind myself, I try and ground myself as much as I possibly can in the word of God. I spend every single day now, when I didn't before, now speaking to God, asking him to show me. And the times that I do fail, I have to be kind to myself. I have to realize that I am only human. God created me as a human being, but because of sin, we're going to fail. We're going to stuff up. But it doesn't mean that God doesn't love us any less. He loves us, and he wants us to live the best life we possibly can live. And he's trying to get us to that place. And in order to get us to that place, we've got to go through the pain. We've got to go through the moments of suffering, not stay there, but we've just got to go through it and get to the other side. And ultimately, me going through all these times and sometimes forgetting, and sometimes not looking towards God, it's amazing how he has turned that all around in my life and actually strengthened my faith to make my compass a lot more stronger to the direction where he wants me to go, not where I want to go. And he gives me everything that I need every single day to overcome, to get through. I've just got to choose to see it as that in my life. It's all, he gives us free will, Angie. And it's amazing how many times we choose to, because of the pain, and not see pain for our benefit rather than they see it as their detriment. You can choose to do that. But once again, your life is going to be miserable instead of choosing to see it this as for my benefit, moving through it with grace, with humility, asking God to show up every single day and every single time that you are feeling down and low. And if you do have a low day, pick yourself back up tomorrow and keep on going. Keep moving forward. Don't ever stop.
I really appreciate what you're saying about humility. That's kind of, I feel like I feel the Holy Spirit calling me to pay special attention to that as we're chatting right now, because I think often when we are displeased with how God is orchestrating something in our lives, I don't know if that's the right word, but displeased with how things are playing out in our lives, where we are with our lives, really there's this like lack of humility, this sort of like idea that I know better than you.
Yeah.
And if you were who you say you were, we wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be here and all that. And really that does point to a self-reliance and an arrogance that, I mean, he can work with anything, but he chooses to let us choose him. And when we're choosing ourselves, then that we're smarter than him or that we know better. And I know I do that all the time. I don't mean to. And it's important to recognize it though. When I'm so discontent with my life,
Yeah.
when I'm so discontent with my life, what I'm really saying is I actually know better than you what's best for my
Yes.
life. That's really good. It's hard for me to receive a little bit tonight, but I'm so grateful for you saying it that way to me, to all of us, because I think that's a really important part of this. Because a lot of us are discontent with our lives, and yeah, thank you,
I
thank you for
I
that
think
word.
we
Yeah.
all have an ego problem. I
Oh,
myself have a
yeah,
big one, and talk about in the book uh, removing the ego. It's available for each and every one of us. And in failure, once again, we learn that
yeah,
valuable lesson.
yeah,
The ego blinds us to the truth.
yeah,
We need
yeah.
to remove the ego so that we can see the truth more clearly.
Hmm.
And when we do that, we allow God to really work in our life.
Yeah, I love that. You have a really popular podcast called The Story Box, and I'm wondering, you're so willing to tell pieces of your story, and you have a passion for helping other people tell their stories, and I'm just wondering, what inspired that interest? Why sit with people? I mean, I know why I do it, but why do you do it? Why do you sit with people and invite them to tell your story so that you can share it?
I love stories. I have always been, I guess, from as a young kid, very curious, always wanting to learn new things. I never got on well with kids my own age because I didn't really relate to their story. I would always go to the adults and ask them weird, wild, and outrageous questions, some of which I won't repeat, or some of which probably annoy the living daylights out of them. But I'm so grateful that they saw that and they fostered that curiosity. They didn't diminish it at all. They encouraged me to be more curious and ask more questions. And same with my grandfather as well. I remember just speaking with him about meaning of life, about just absorbing as much wisdom and advice that came from his mouth. And it would often come in the form of a story. And even my dad does it as well. I loved listening to my dad and my mum's stories, and then people that I knew, and then also reading books. My mum used to read to us all the time. But for me as a young kid, I was very aware, and this came from the curiosity part of things, very aware of things that were going on in the world, even back then. And as a 5 and 6 year old, I remember just asking my mum, why do people believe in the Easter Bunny? Why do people believe in Santa Claus? They're not real. And for a lot of kids, they're like, be quiet, Jay. What are you talking about?
You're getting in
But
the way.
yes, allow me to believe something here, Jay. Like,
Exactly.
and I just feel like, no, 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 you can't. It's not real. And for me, growing up with that sort of passion and desire, I think has only informed me more. I also wanted to be a filmmaker, so being able to share stories, and it's interesting because I never went to the movies growing up. Like as a kid, growing up in the conservative Christian home, my parents would be like, "No, you can't go to the movies. It's not a good place. Satan lives there." That whole thing, and it mainly came from the ads, believe it or not, which I thought was funny. But anyway, uh, because of that, I wanted to share stories of not just from my own imagination, but true stories from people that I had actually heard, because that inspired me the most. That moved me. That made me so much more to desire this passion and this medium. And so that's what I tried to do in my life. And then uh, life didn't really work out the way I wanted it to. And ultimately, it led me to doing the Storybox podcast, which is I've been able to speak with people who I actually grew up watching on movies and listening to, which is honestly incredible when you think about it,
Yes.
and getting to unbox things about their life that not many people have actually heard before, ask some questions, things that they might not have been asked before. And I myself, just being my authentically curious, natured person, and wanting to learn, wanting to grow, absorb as much as I can, because that is the sheer joy of life. Comes from creativity, comes from being able to absorb wisdom and knowledge from people's stories and experiences. And so I'm blessed to be able to do it, Angie,
I
honestly.
love that. And I love the idea of it just being curious and seeking truth. I think that's what draws me to stories so much too, is because I'm really, when I know more about your story, I understand a little bit more about like what makes you tick or what makes you react a certain way or whatever. And I love stories. I love sharing stories. I love being curious and I love uncovering the truth. I really do.
Mm.
That's like an important part of it too. And I'm with you. When I sit with someone like this, one of my favorite things that people say to me every once in a while is, "No one has ever asked me that before." I'm like, "Oh, yay." Like, I think that's like
I
the
love it
best.
too.
Yeah.
You get like that spur of like that
I know. Ooh,
that
we're at the
giddy
best
feeling, you
place.
know?
Yeah.
I get goosebumps when people
I
say that
know.
to me. I'm
I
like, "Oh,
know.
that's so cool."
I know. Or they'll pause a second and be like, "Wow, that's a good question." I'm like, "Thank you." Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that part.
Day made.
Exactly, exactly. But hey, you mentioned Isaiah 40, verse 31. If I wrote that down correctly, I think I did. And I'm wondering, is that you said that was your life verse? So I'm thinking that's probably at least one of your favorites, your go-tos. Do you have that in front of you or do you know it in your head? Are you able to rattle it off for us? I put you on the spot, but I'm suspecting that it's not too far away from where you are.
I probably should know it off by heart, but
It's
there's
hard.
different versions, right,
Well, there
of
is
the
different
actual.
versions, and a lot of times I every once in a while, I'm like, "I know my verse too," and then you ask me, and all of a sudden my mind goes blank, so I get that. Yeah, yeah.
This is why I have what I call my Eagle journal beside me all the time, and it's got it on the front cover
I
so people
love
can
it.
see it.
I love it.
And
Yes.
this version, I don't know what version it actually is. It's not the KJV or anything like that, which is what I'm normally used to. But it says, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on the wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." And that, for me, all time best verse I've ever heard in the Bible. Because if you, aside from Jesus wept, of course, no, just kidding, or Jesus saves, uh, it's basically talking about the third word there is hope. And
Mm,
that for a lot of people, the world, what are they hoping in? They're hoping in themselves. They're hoping for something to happen in their life. They're not hoping in the one that really, really matters the most. And that is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
yes.
So when we hope in the Lord, what does he do for us? He
Mhm.
renews our strength. Sometimes when we get weary, when we get anxious, when we feel down, we feel like we can't get back up. But when we hope in the Lord, He's going to renew that strength. We get that reinvigoration once again to do what? So we can soar through the challenge, so we can soar through life like we were designed and created to do. Because God doesn't want us to be stuck on the ground. He wants us to learn to go through the challenge, sure, and that's going to happen. But He wants us to get back up, to spread our wings, and to soar through life the best way we possibly can. And so when we get knocked down, we're able to build that strength back up when we hope back in Him, get back up, and keep moving forward, keep on soaring. So that's
I
the
love
way
that.
I look at it
Yeah.
in my own life, and it's really formed the path of an eagle.
Yes. Yeah, I
the
love
the
that. I love
whole.
that you have the journal that you write in and the book that you've written from your time with the Lord, as are both so closely connected for you right now. And I think that's a beautiful testimony, Jay. This
Thank
has
you.
been fantastic, and I'm just so grateful for the ways that you have shared. Before I let you go, I always ask this of my guests. I love to share resources, and I'm wondering what else might be sitting there on your side table, or what's in your earbuds? What are you watching, listening to, reading, anything at all that's just encouraging you, helping you wait upon the Lord, keeping you connected to Him right now?
Well, conversations like this, Angie, They're amazing. Also my family. So I've got a photo of my, I can show people actually.
Yes.
I always look at it. So it's a photo of my two brothers and our old dog that passed away sadly in 2019. So that was one of the grief-stricken things. And then that's another photo of my other dog. And then also beside me here is our beautiful new one, Alita Joy. So this keeps me very, very much grateful and inspired to go about my life. And I'm surrounded by books too. Like I've got a bookshelf behind me that people can see. I've got a bookshelf off to my right here. I've got my journals beside me. I've got my computer. I've got everything that I need. And the inspiration ultimately is also my Bible that is beside me too. So all these things, they count for something, and soon I'll have the official copy of my book. So to think that, hey, I wrote a book,
Yeah.
it's
It's a big deal.
nuts.
It's a big
uh,
deal. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I appreciate what you're saying with things all around you, because one of the reasons that I share resources and I ask all my guests that question is because it matters. It matters what we're reading, what we're listening to, what we're watching, and I think the more that we can have the things around us in our earbuds, all of those, the more we can have those things be things that are pointing us back to hoping in the Lord, pointing us back to waiting on the Lord, pointing us back to trusting in Him, the more that we can fight those feelings that you've been talking about, some of those feelings of discontent and misery with our lives, and instead, um, you know, wait for Him to do exactly what
mm,
you're talking about, renewing that strength in us. So, yeah. So, thank you
and we
for
can
that.
have an entire conversation about patience, but maybe for another time.
I would like to have that talk with you. Yes, yes. Patience and humility go a great deal together as well. I have learned. Yes,
They
and
do.
am learning. Yes, yeah. So, again, this has been such a joy, and I really appreciate you and the way that you've taken some time with us to share this. And I want to let you know, the listener, that Jay can be found at thestoryboxpodcast.com. His podcast is The Storybox Podcast. His book is The Path of an Eagle: How to Overcome and Lead After Being Knocked Down. And all of that and other things that Jay has mentioned today, the places to find and follow him, will be in today's show notes. And one more time, thank you so much for serving us today.
You're more than welcome, Angie. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you for listening. Until next time, peace. How are you waiting on the Lord? It is a promise of God that by trusting in Him to provide everything we need, we will indeed be people who face life with strength and peace. We find a reminder of that promise in our verse for this week, Isaiah 40:31a, this time from the ESV. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to listen to the Take It In episode this week, where my incredible co-host Susie Crosby and I focus on the word wait. A huge thank you again to Jay for serving us with his Live It Out story. You have helped us remember that humility before the Lord and strength for the day go hand in hand. Next week, our verse will be John 17:17, that says, God's word is truth. And my guest will be mother of 8 boys. Yes, you heard that correctly. Mother of 8 boys, Tess Scott. Tess is a self-proclaimed black sheep turned Jesus girl, and she'll be with us to talk about finding hope in what she calls the freak show of life. You won't want to miss it. If you haven't yet, I'd be so grateful if you would follow the podcast on whatever directory you're using to listen. It only takes a second, and it guarantees you'll see new episodes as soon as they drop. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.